So hello, we are about to start in 2-3 minutes, so please take a seat. So we could ask people to come in the front. You're invited to get closer.
People will still come. Yeah. Well, I was saying that's what happens after lunch.
So I hope you enjoyed the lunch. We're going to start this session. So it's nice, it's great to be here in Cape Town. We are in such a beautiful city where you got Table Mountains, you got penguins, you got everything. So great to be here. I would like to introduce myself. I'm Hernan Munoz. I'm the Planning and Statistical Director of Planning and Coordination Director of INDEC of Argentina, the NSO of Argentina. I would like to introduce Johannes Uting. Johannes is the manager of Paris 21, and we will be co-moderating this session. We are co-leading this track, this new approaches to capacity development for better data track that we are opening here in this session. And we are also, with Johannes, we are the co-chairs of the program committee of the World Data Forum, and we are very proud and very happy what is happening here. So it is a pleasure to open this track. Here we will talk and share and discuss around very many variables that are involved in the capacity development for better data and its new approaches. But before introduce the panel, and I would like to say a few words about this particular track. So, although we covered as many aspects as the time and space allow us, of this capacity building track, we know that some topics and speakers may not have all the time and a space that we would like them to have. And before Johannes provides us more details about this particular track, let me just say a few personal words from a country that has undergone a fundamental political change in the last year, and how this relates to this capacity building topic. So as I said, I'm coming from Argentina. I'm a director of planning and coordination in our INDEC, in our NSO. And I want to say some words about the capacity development, because over the last decades in data and statistics, capacity development has been mainly understood as a technical issue. Methods, standards, calculations, etc. Statistical, mathematical, and data science. In reality, however, we realize that with the best technical intentions, the outcomes could completely fail if the overall institution and government's framework is floated. Yeah. For NSOs, it is important to use initiatives as SDGs, not only to get involved and contribute to the international statistical community and the national and global society in general, which is very important, but this environment also contributes positively to encourage national statistical systems, particularly in developing countries, to improve, modernize, and rethink their institutional government framework. Developing countries have lots of priorities in their agenda. As you may know, we are talking here about important things, although countries sometimes have urgent things. You know, we got the poverty, we got a huge agenda for the political authorities. So those urgent issues sometimes relegate these important issues as statistics. And the modernization and strengthening of our statistical systems need the political support to introduce the necessary changes. But the political scope is usually focused on the urgent issues. In the case of Argentina, for example, we faced in the past a public discussion of the role of NSOs and the quality of our statistics, and we were everywhere, and everyone was speaking about statistics. So that was a good opportunity now that we are facing a political change and we are facing a change of authorities in our NSOs. It is important to have this opportunity, to introduce all the necessary changes to our national statistical system. Since I arrived last year, we were empowered to introduce these necessary changes in our institutional framework and to strengthen the independence of our official statistics. And this is an opportunity that National Statistical Office have to use. We have to use these kind of opportunities, but not every country is in this situation. Not every country is and prioritize its statistical system because, as I said, there are other urgent matters. So I think that these kind of initiatives as SDGs are very good opportunities to bring back the capacity building issue, to bring back the necessary changes that our national statistics systems are asking, but maybe are not in the main political agenda. So what I'm talking about is that we unfortunately had or this opportunity arises as a result of a deep crisis in the statistics of our country, that we have a completely loss of trust in our statistics from society, international community, and in this context, we are able now to introduce the changes we know that are necessary, but not always the authority have that tools so close to do that. That's why we are thinking SDGs and this capacity building track. We are going to talk about, for example, coordination and cooperation that we think it is very important, and that's why we are leading and being involved in this track, in this capacity building track, because in Argentina we did learn that being isolated leads to failure. That's why cooperation and coordination of the statistical systems is important. It's important to be open. It's important to be transparent, to be participatory. So this SDGs context is an environment that encourages to include everyone, leaving no one behind, and we wanted to be part of it, actually. So NSOs need to be participatory, needs to be committed for protecting their own independence. And that's also what capacity building refers. That's why we as INDEC and myself representing Argentina are here, and they take part of this World Data Forum. That's why we are co-chairing the program committee, and we were so committed on this particular track here with Johannes Uting and Paris 21. And I hope you enjoyed the sessions. We got very good sessions for you to prepare, and Johannes, please, he will go deeper on the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hernan. I have to confess at the beginning, or I have to say, it was a very truly collaborative effort, Argentina and Paris 21, and also I learned a lot while working with many others also on this track on new approaches to capacity development. Now, from Paris 21 perspective, we have been engaging in capacity development for the last 15 years. As one of our main mandate is to build capacities, in particular in poor developing countries and fragile states. And it's interesting to see of how we came to the idea to have a really fresh look at capacity development. And I was thinking hard, how can I make a link to this morning session? And in fact, it's not so difficult. I mean, if you still recall what we have heard this morning, at least what I heard was Enrico Giovannini saying we need to speed up. We heard the call for capacity building was mentioned, and more coordination. And often if we listen to presentations about SDGs, data and statistics, often the last slide of those presentations end with, we need to build more capacity. We need to build more capacity. We need to build more capacity. And the presentation stops. Now, what we want to do, we want to start with that. We want to unpack capacity development and unpack capacity development building. We want to understand what do we really mean by this. Because if you dig a little bit deeper, we might have all very different understanding what capacity development means and for whom it is. To whom are we talking? Do we talk about capacity development mainly about the data producer side? Or do we also need to look at capacity development for the users? Or even more so, and I look at Michael, capacity development for the donors. So I think that will be very interesting sort of perspective in looking at for whom and what. Now, we want to start this track with one hypothesis, very clearly at the outset, and the hypothesis is that we need a fundamental change of how we think about capacity development, a completely different change, and this for three main reasons. The first is, now we have the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and we heard this morning all the challenges that come along with it. If you just look at the monitoring side, now the 230 to 240 indicators, which is one part, but then we also know that there is the reporting part, but then there's also the part of producing data that's relevant for the country and which is linked to their own national strategies, the national development plan and the national statistical plan. So the SDGs are clearly, and we all have heard it a lot, is a game changer. So is the data revolution, a completely game changer, because national statistical offices, as we have heard, have to relate now not only to their line ministries and to other agencies within the NSS system, which they have already a great difficulty, but they also have now to relate to citizens groups, to academia, to think tanks, and to the private sector, which may need completely different skill sets of National Statistical Office heads in terms of next to technical skills, to have skill set like being able to lead and drive change in a statistical office, to engage with multi-stakeholder partnerships, change management, leadership, and building networks, which is maybe not so much on the agenda before when we look at capacity development. And last but not least, it has been, at the end of the opening session, the post-truth debate. If we are entering into a debate in terms of where data and statistics and empirical evidence maybe is not even valued anymore by society, what do we do then? So I think the game changer here is very clearly that we had a very supply-driven view of statistical capacity development, and what we need to move towards is a more demand-driven, more not only producing the data, but putting a narrative to it. I think citizens expect from us, from the statistical community and from the data community, not only to put out the data, possibly even put out less data, but give them a narrative that they can relate to. So on those kind of questions, we want to dive really deep. We want to understand and hear a different perspective from donors, from a capacity development think tank, from National Statistical Office, and from a regional institution. What needs to change? Would you agree with a fundamental change? What are the current bottlenecks that needs to be addressed? Now we have, and you will see later, we have 10, within that track, we have 10 different sessions, so you can look for the blue color-coded tracks, and please go all to the capacity development track because it's so exciting. And we have, but as we are here, of course, we kick this off by, with 4 distinguished panelists, and we will introduce them one by one. And it's a great pleasure to have Michael Gerber started. He has been introduced already in the morning, and he will give us the perspective from Switzerland. Michael, could you please take the floor?
Thank you very much, Johannes, Hernan. Thank you to INDEC Argentina, Paris 21 for the kind invitation. And once again to all the organizers and supporters of the World Data Forum to make it happen. I'm very glad to be here again in such a short period, already twice up here. That's a great honor for me. And I was asked to kick off this session and to share, does it work this? No, I think nothing happens. Here.
Yeah,
so,
there it is.
Yeah. I was asked to kick off this discussion and to share some thoughts about the SDGs and the opportunities and challenges they offer as we rethink capacity development in the area of statistics and data. First of all, I would like to state that I consider the SDGs a real game changer. As Johannes mentioned before, I think many of us agree, but what does it really mean in regard to capacity development? It is not only a game changer in terms of development results or expected development results, I believe, but also in the field of data and statistics, as they are very broad, ambitious, and they require an unprecedented amount of high-quality data to be monitored. I deem important to recall that, as we discuss here in Cape Town, the data revolution is taking place at the global level, at a global scale. A revolution that is transforming our lives at unprecedented speed. This brings a lot of benefits to the people. However, these benefits are mostly limited to the ones who have access to respective data and tools, such as mobile devices or cloud computing or others. The big challenge is now how to make use of this data revolution in order to support the implementation and the review of the SDGs. And we know currently that data quality, availability, and collection capacities fall short of what is needed to monitor the SDGs effectively. Long-term commitment is required to support statistical offices and data quality, as well as transformation of data into useful evidence for decision-making. We've heard that many times already today. And here again, I believe the SDGs can be a game changer. I mentioned it in the morning. Unlike the MDGs, the SDGs require us to be more accurate, more nuanced, more innovative, and more collaborative. This applies to the design of evidence-based policies as well as to measuring progress. But without better disaggregated data, we will fail to do so. Already during the negotiations on the 2030 agenda and the SDGs, I learned from my colleagues from the Statistical Office that this is not such an easy feat or issue. More disaggregated data has always been important for Switzerland. and that's why we've always had, right from the beginning, a very close collaboration with our statistical office. But during that time, in this institutional exchange, I also learned that producing disaggregated data is more challenging than many of us working at a rather political level had hoped. Sometimes legal frameworks don't allow for disaggregating the data. Sometimes there are methodological challenges to the production of indicators. But the biggest problem is the lack of resources. Narrowing gaps in data availability and quality is crucial to turn ambition into reality, and this requires investment and long-term commitment to support capacity building, particularly in government statistical offices. In short, this means if we want to have disaggregated data of high quality, we need more investment. And as you can see on this slide, the funding gap is quite pronounced. According to the statistics of Paris 21, in 2014, official development assistance, ODA, dedicated to statistics only amounted to $470 million, which represented 0.25% of total ODA. An additional $350 to $400 million are required in order to produce and use the SDG indicators. And for many donor countries, statistical capacity building is not a priority, perhaps also because it has been perceived as a rather technical and thus not very attractive issue. But in my opinion, the SDGs now present a clear opportunity to correct this image, to a certain extent at least, and to create a momentum in favor of data and statistics. On the one hand, because the SDGs explicitly mention the need for statistical capacity development in Goal 17, in targets 17.18 and 17.19. And on the other hand, because the 2030 Agenda, the outcome document, also features a specific chapter on follow-up and review, laying out the key pillars of tracking progress towards the realization of the SDGs. And I'm proud that we, the UN member states, managed to establish a solid mechanism for the follow-up and review, with the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, the HLPF, as the key intergovernmental platform. This review has to be done using a set of more than 230 global indicators developed by the Interagency Expert Group, endorsed by the Statistical Commission in March 2016. The fact that statisticians were included early in the discussions about the SDGs and the indicators for review, and that there was an official session on this issue at the HLPF 2016, further underlines the increased importance. I have the feeling that, thanks to the many discussions we've had in this context, the policy and decision makers start becoming much more aware of the importance of high-quality statistics. These changing perceptions might make the field of statistics more attractive and could eventually lead to narrowing the funding gap mentioned before. But the reality is also that donors are only moving slowly, particularly in the light of stagnating aid budgets. Moreover, we have to take into account that some national governments might not be all too enthusiastic about more and better quality data, as there could be political risks implied linked to increased transparency about the state of development in certain areas. Another challenge is the fact that even with more funds, doing more of the same is not necessarily better, but could in turn lead to fragmentation and inefficiencies. Support needs to be much more specific to the needs of recipients, and it has to include all relevant actors beyond national statistical offices. Collaboration between donors, for example, with joint programming or joint programs, could be or is another key issue that fosters better coordination of efforts. Most importantly, to better develop statistical capacity, a modernization process must be launched. There are different bodies already engaged in doing so. For example, the High-Level Group on Modernization for Official Statistics by the UNEC, or the Global Action Plan by the High-Level Group. They discuss all the elements that are needed. Vast knowledge already exists with regard to the modernization of statistical systems. There are strategic documents that show the way forward, and there is an exchange happening within the statistics community around best practices. In Switzerland, we are proud to support Paris 21 in order to improve statistical capacities in developing countries. We also support partner countries directly with concrete projects that help establish a solid basis for the production of relevant indicators, for example, in Palestine, Myanmar, or Albania at the moment. We are also active in the field of big data. We are convinced that big data will help us produce statistics of better quality in a timely manner, and despite all the risks and challenges that come with it. Therefore, the Swiss Federal Statistical Office is also engaged in a working group that tries to address the challenge of making big data useful for producing official statistics. In the end, we have to admit, though, that even these developments are desirable and extremely important, they are not sufficient to eventually produce the statistics we need to review progress towards the achievement of the SDGs. Without a clear commitment and further resources, change will be too slow in order to live up to the SDGs until 2030. And now I could stop here, Johannes, concluding just the way, as you mentioned before, saying we need more support, but that was it. No, I would like to end on a more positive, optimistic note, not such a pessimistic note, quite the contrary. Because, as I mentioned in the beginning, I consider the SDGs a game changer for data and statistics. And therefore, I would like to conclude with a quote of Winston Churchill: "Let's be optimists and let's see the difficulties we face with the SDGs as opportunities in order to transform data and statistics into useful tools and to eventually transform the world." Thank you very much.
So thanks, Michael. I would like to remark, as you said, the SDGs to be a game changer. It's the opportunity for the national statistical systems, as I said before, that we have to use that for more, to create statistical and institutional capacity. So I would like to introduce Emmanuel Nadusi. He's Executive Secretary of the African Capacity Building Foundation. So, again, Emmanuel, please.
Thank you very much. And I want to, because time is of essence, let me just simply observe the existing protocol and thank the organizers for really recognizing that you have to bring a capacity building organization into a discourse on capacity development. Because often that is not what happens. Everybody believes that they can do better than we can do. But I'm really appreciative of that. And I know that time is of essence, so we're going to try to be as quick and as focused as possible. Because the African Capacity Building Foundation is a foundation that builds capacity in Africa, so much of my presentation would be focusing on Africa, understandably. And secondly, too, from this morning, we understood that this is a region that has a very severe problem when it comes to capacity for data and statistics. So you will excuse me on that. Now, I have 4 arguments to make, but I'll make them as I present. The first one is that capacity is central to economic development and economic transformation, whether they are hard or soft capacities. And here I just basically show that if you look at industrial value added and measure that and correlate that with what our capacity in the indices that we measure every year, you would see that there is a positive correlation which shows the centrality of capacity in economic transformation. Second point I'm going to make is that for the continent of Africa, a lot of progress has been made, especially in the past 25 years. But the gaps that remain are quite significant, and there are things that continue to hobble Africa's development as we speak. And what I show here is some of the progress that has been made, which, regardless of those progress, or that progress, you still have some problems in terms of capacity. The good news is that a larger proportion of African countries are no longer in what we call the low capacity categories, but rather they're moving into the medium capacity categories. But I bet you if you were to measure data and statistics capacity, the picture may not look exactly like this. It's going to be worse than what you have here. This is overall capacity for policy and the rest of them. Now, magnitude of the gap. You see, in the next 10 years for Africa to achieve at least the goals that it has in the Agenda 2063, the first 10 years, it will need to be producing at least 500 engineers every year. Currently, it has less than 100 engineers that are functioning on the continent. So the task is quite significant for you to realize that. Now, the third argument that I'm going to make is that SDGs do present a unique opportunity for capacity development in the area of data and statistics, and the ambassador really made some points on this as well. I'll just add to what has been said before. Here, number one is that it should really provide an opportunity for a conceptual framing and proper understanding of capacity in the area of data and statistics. And that's part of what this panel today is trying to do. Secondly, it will help in determining capacity requirements in the area of data and statistics. It doesn't matter which country or which part of the world you're looking at. Thirdly, it should help, in the case of Africa, to focus African critical technical skills, for the continent to really understand the critical technical skills in this area and accelerate the building of those human capacity in a way that it will make transformation possible. Fourthly, that enhancing partnerships, collaboration, and coherence in establishing a capacity development plan framework is quite critical in this area as well, and implementing those frameworks as well. So partnership and coordination is something that the SDGs is going to help to do. And last but not the least is that it is, SDGs present an opportunity for innovation in capacity development and capacity for innovation. So there's innovation and capacity development, but also capacity for innovation in the area of data and statistics, which are two things that are critical. But there are a lot of challenges. I think the two most significant challenges. Number one is I'm worried that we are going to, as the saying goes, old habits die hard. We fall back into the way things were happening, whereby a lot of prescriptions that came from outside were partly responsible for the significant reduction in the national capacity development offices in the continent, which was doing well before then. And secondly, the fact that people will come to say they're going to do a workshop or training for 1 week or 1 month, and then there's a huge buzz around it, and they've said they're building capacity. That's not the way we understand capacity development in Africa. So that the field is crowded now, everybody's jumping in to go and do something directly so they can shine and showcase that they are doing something. But that is the danger for every region in the world. That is neither sustainable nor something that can actually be, build capacity in a meaningful way. So we could run the risk of focusing on what is sexy instead of what is fundamental. And so this is, this is some of it. But the second point I'm making is the issue of financing. And I'm very happy that the ambassador from Switzerland did highlight this issue. It is far more serious than you think. The picture I present here shows that there is a decline in funding for capacity development. So the issue of predictable funding is a challenge. The funding is not predictable, it is not adequate, and it's not sustainable. And to make matters worse, it is declining over the years. When you look at, for example, using ACBF an example of what we have estimated over the years to be able to build capacity, you'll find that the actual money that is coming in from the government, from the donors, from the other sectors is quite on the decline. And that is a significant challenge for everybody. Now, the cost of that is very, very significant in terms of sustainability of capacity development efforts and policy reversals. So I will go then to the next question, or next point, argument that I'm making, which is that innovations in capacity development can really benefit capacity for data and statistics. And based on ACBF's 25 years of, or nearly 26 years of capacity development experience, we have actually begun to look at how to conceptualize the notion of capacity development in Agenda 2063 and in the Agenda 2030 from an African perspective. And we have 4 sets of capacities that we have clearly identified. The first one is what we call the operational capacity for organizations. And I won't go into the details on that. The second one is what we call the change and transformative capacities. And the third one is the composite capacities. And the fourth one is critical, technical, and sector-specific skills. So this is not just about training or human capacity development. Actually, the one that has emerged to become very important as I move forward, as you see the presentation, are the not-so-evident capacities or the soft capacities for this continent, whereby it is a question of leadership, a question of values, and a question of policy, what they call political will, and so on and so forth, that has to be generated for anything to happen. I don't care which sector you're talking about, whether it's in statistics or you're talking about agriculture or human development. So there are some, and Joanne has just really mentioned some of them already, some of the new concepts that we must take into consideration when we're thinking about building capacity in area of data and statistics. And these are some of the things that are there. Issue of less tangible, soft dimensions, complete system changes that we have to look at, the demand-side approaches that has been mentioned, and so on and so forth. And making sure that we start from what works and not thinking about how to, go into certain things that we may not be capable of doing at the same time, but understanding the existing assets that are there and building from them. Now, so these are the things that I have listed here, but let me highlight one or two important issues from the list that you have here. The first one is the multidimensional approach that is important. The second one is the issue of political economy. And this was mentioned earlier this morning by both Pali Lola and one other presenter this morning. They say that often statisticians stay in their own office and think that that's the world, where the world begins and ends, when they don't understand that you have to be out there understanding the political gamesmanship, what is happening in the larger society. I think Pali is an example of that. There's practically no time he's not on news or TV telling the whole of South Africans how important statistics and data is. And so they hold their country, their governments accountable for that. That's the second. The third one, which I think is extremely important, is often we have paid attention, which is correct, on human capacity development, training a lot of people. But for Africa, the real danger is actually the issue of retention of that capacity and the utilization of that capacity. When I mentioned the huge gap you have in engineers in the world, in Africa, a young man wrote me an email to say, I read you on BBC talking about this. Me, I'm an engineer, I'm unemployed. So how do you reconcile the fact that you say you have gaps in the number of engineers you have, and a young man who says I have an engineering degree, but I don't have jobs? So, I mean, I don't have time to go into this. I could, if this is for another debate. Johannes I promised him I'll be done in less than 15 minutes. And I think I'm on track for doing that. So these are just the details of some of the things I have mentioned before. And the ecosystem, when you're thinking about capacity development, no matter which area you're thinking about, these are the things that you need to consider. And then this is the next argument that I will make, that the strategy that we have developed based on 25, 26 years of experience in capacity development, and a study that we did on what we say the future of capacity development in Africa and the role that we should play in it, we have come up with a new approach that I believe that is very instructive. And this approach, which is a catalytic approach, is based on 4 pillars. One, focusing on the continental and sub-regional levels. The other is something that supports the achievement of results at the country level. And the third one is focusing on the non-state actors, private sector in particular, and civil society. And the fourth one is leveraging knowledge to make sure that we use that in advancing our interests. So these pillars are the things that we are going to be focusing on, and I recommend that people look at that carefully. In terms of delivery mechanisms, so we are trying to put in some new ones, ranging from resource mobilization, which everybody now identifies that it is a critical issue for capacity development, and to the issues that ACBF has been doing for 25 years, giving grants, making investments in capacity development, and managing resources. Yes, we do manage funds for capacity development. In case somebody has funds to do, we have an agreement with the Gates Foundation, with the Australian government, where we feel that we can do better than that, and we're able to manage those funds. The third one is knowledge services. The fourth one is the innovations that we are doing. And fourth is to provide capacity development services. But there are some underlying principles which I think are innovative to make sure that you have a participatory approach when you're dealing with capacity development. Number two is to make sure that there is ownership by the client and that the value is added, which means one has to look at the landscape to see who else is there so you can work together and coordinate better to add value. And then to think about sustainability when you deserve programs and the partnership that can be developed. And this is an example of what we have tried to do in the area of illicit financial flows to help governments to be able to build the requisite capacities to address it. And this is our approach, which I think should be useful in talking about data and statistics capacity development. When there was a serious challenge in Africa in terms of economic policy management, public sector management, banking and finance, what SCBF did was to really establish regional programs in existing universities. We didn't create new ones. And so we strengthened the institutions at the same time as we built thousands and thousands of middle-level managers. In this case, it could be data experts and statisticians in several regions. So this model can be replicated, no matter what field you're in. We have all these in different countries, and I think they have been highly successful. And also examples in supporting planning officers, that is going beyond the national statistical offices, as well as data harmonization and statistics around global and continental and country levels. The last slide I have is what governments and donors need to do. And I believe they need to have more than anything else, change in mindset and change in approach. And there are so many things that they can do, but I've listed just a couple of them. Putting capacity development back at the center of the development efforts, both in theory and in practice, not just the talk, but also the action. Promoting the building of and strengthening of institutions that are critical for capacity development in the area of data and statistics. Paying attention to the critical technical skills that are, so this shows me that I'm really on time, 14 minutes exactly. I'm an economist, so I even economize on time, So trying to prioritize the low capacity countries, on countries that are affected by conflict or crisis, and in particular women and youth in this endeavor, and mobilizing the diaspora capacity, which is not often talked about. And I don't have time to go into that. Another dimension is to try to encourage intra-Africa capacity and skills circulation. This is a very big area that we are working with the African Union to see how we can do that, so that people can move from areas of that have high endowment in the kind of capacity you need to the areas where you have low endowment freely, which requires some sort of harmonization and all kinds of policies that will enhance that kind of mobility. And addressing the critical issues of financing, as I mentioned, and I say, do not reinvent the wheel or compete with those who are the specialists. Those institutions who are and of course, you can understand, I want you to give me the resources. Don't come there to tell me to say you know how to do it better than I do. And we can work together, and we can put your flag as big as possible so everybody know that this resource is coming from Switzerland, not coming from SCBF. And of course, last important point is to incorporate capacity retention and utilization strategies into the design of capacity building programs. And ACBF is doing a lot of work in this area now. How do you increase capacity retention? How do you increase capacity utilization? I thank you very much for listening to me. 15 minutes exactly, Johannes.
Thank you so much, Professor, for this really rich and insightful presentation. And apologies that we need to box you into 15 minutes. So we will make sure, there are 31 slides in 15 minutes. So it's really useful, and we will make sure that you can access his presentation, because there are so many information in the presentation still that for time reasons you couldn't fully reflect upon. But so if you want to have a look at the presentation, we will make it available. I really wanted to echo, or you mentioned two things that struck me hard, because we have a current conversation in this changing data world. You mentioned old habits die hard, and that there's often the focus on the sexy one, on the speedy one, and on the boring stuff, and capacity development often means time. I mean, if we build new statistical systems in poor countries, what can you expect to achieve in 1 or 2 years? It might take 10 years, it might take 15 or 20 years. And I think this mindset, as you also were saying, to understand that and to be sort of holding the course while making adjustments as you go. I mean, there's nobody saying that all these capacity development programs are perfect or shouldn't be changed, but also to realize that despite there's a lot of public pressure in donor countries for showing imminent results, there needs to be some people who can hold the ground and say, listen, if you want to do the job right in capacity development, it might just take 5, 10, 15, 20 years. It just takes time with development. And I think you have had some other great considerations on speaking about the need for change and leadership. You mentioned the political economy, and you also mentioned building on existing structures, which I think many of us who are engaged in the data revolution debates appreciate this reminder of need to work within existing structures while being open for change. So again, thank you so much. Now we move to some sort of more conversational style. We had 2 background presentations, and then now we are moving to a little bit more conversational style. And we are very pleased to have Ola Awad with us, the president from the Central Bureau of Statistics of Palestine. And Ola, I wanted to kick off in terms of with one question, you as a head of a statistical office, in terms of what you heard, in terms of what are the most, in terms of capacity challenges, in terms of capacity hurdles, as of today, what are the most important hurdles that you see in your own country and in your own institution?
Thank you, Han. Thank you for inviting me to this session. It's really a pleasure to be among you. So I may speak on 3 main dimensions. First one on the role of the National Statistical Office, where actually there's a need of modernization in the structuring of the NSO. And I mean by that having the Sustainable Development Goals with the ambitious of really the goals within the 169 targets, and we're talking about around 230 indicators, they're really a huge challenge on the NSO by itself. And we are really very proud as National Statistical Offices that this time there was a learning lessons learned from the MDGs and how we were working on the MDGs and the gaps which has been actually had during the implementation of the MDGs towards developing it on the work on and development of the process of the Sustainable Development Goals. So there's a need of modernization inside the National Statistical Office, restructuring and making sure that we are actually within the structure of the institutions, that there is actually a good structure to absorb the work on the Sustainable Development Goals, focusing more on the administrative data because the Sustainable Development Goals are really depend more on the admin data rather than on surveys. So really we have to focus more on that particular area. I want to talk about the modernization of the working methodologies too within the administrative data. I really very much agree with Emmanuel when he was talking about the developing and improving the existing tools, which we fully agree that there's no need to invent the wheel. We have to develop our existing tools. We have to develop our just generic statistics business process model, the metadata, the monitoring and evaluation tools. We were working in the past on the MDGs, for example, with you, PERS 21, and with the UNSD on the SDMX. And it's actually a dissemination tool. Some other NSO use it for developing its master plan, some other use it for the monitoring, and some others for the dissemination part. And that's part of the needed, how we can develop the existing tools for all the process, whether it's data collection, data processing, or data dissemination. This is the way of I look on the National Statistical Office, but we have another 2 main roles. Well, the participatory approach that Emmanuel has also mentioned within our stakeholders now. stakeholders has to play a major role with us, and we are talking about a participatory approach and enhancing a real partnership with our stakeholders. And now there's a need also to involve other ones, new ones, including private sector, which wasn't actually before within our national statistical system. And also, I may add also the civil society organizations, also they're supposed to be part of the whole dilemma within the work on the Sustainable Development Goals. In addition to this, from our experience when we started to work on the Sustainable Development Goals, it really took us a while as a statistical office to learn and to increase our awareness and to have a real culture to understand what we are talking about. And this exactly the need for also of our stakeholders increase the awareness on what we are talking about and communication among our producers, among our users, and also mainly also our policymakers. There's also this time a need for a role for the governments inside the countries. We are talking about Sustainable Development Goals. They are the one who has to decide the priorities, and they are the one who has to implement it. And we have a role as statistical offices to monitor and evaluate the goals and the targets that has been decided on the national level. So there should be a way of what we call it, define a good communication a mechanism between the government and the National Statistical Office. I may mention, maybe it's just an example and very simple example, that what we have already did in Palestine, the time our government endorsed within the General Assembly the Sustainable Development Goals, we actually called for all the government institutions, and we worked together, and we found that the good communication, or what we call it, mechanism that can having to formulate a high-level committee headed by the Prime Minister Office, and our office, PCBS, is a member of this high-level committee, and we have also formulated a technical committee headed by PCBS with all of our partners. And this was really a very good way of, to get engaged between the government role and the National Statistical Office. So just to bridge such kind of gap. And now the most important thing is making sure that the sectorial strategies inside the country are based on the priorities from the Sustainable Development Goals and be integrated on our national strategy for the national statistical system. So in order to have such kind of consistency between the priorities of the countries and actually the work of the National Statistical Office. So this way there will be a consistency and a way of working together. But I may say that all what I'm talking about, really, it needs a lot of increasing in the capacity building among our main players, among our policymakers, leaders, and also the Statistical Office by itself. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So it seems that you are undergoing and you are embracing already the change. Now the issue of the donors has come up, and if I can just ask one follow-up question, is about, so you explained to us how you change and how you adapt and the challenges and the opportunities that you see with the SDGs. Now, in your view, in terms of, you see and observe donor behavior, multilateral donors, but also bilateral donors. Do you want them, I mean, what would be your advice for donors be in terms of their need to also change, to embrace a new agenda on capacity development, to help you to do a better job?
Thank you so much. That's, I think, for us as a National Statistical Office, that are actually one of our main challenge. I may go back to the MDGs, and if you all remember, that when we started working on the MDGs, it was actually a donor led and headed by donors and UN agencies. And we, as National Statistical Offices, we were trying to catch up with them. And it wasn't really a very good experience as National Statistical Offices. I'm not talking about my Bureau of Statistics. I'm talking really on the global level. And it's really important also to get the lessons learned from the MDGs. And that's why when we came to the Sustainable Development Goals and within the Statistics Commission, we actually raised the importance that the work on the Sustainable Development Goals has to be headed by the National Statistical Offices. And this we really started and we succeeded. And we're really happy that things have started earlier in a very early stage in a very good manner. But still, until today, since we started working on the Sustainable Development Goals, until today, we are unable to get together the National Statistical Offices, the UN agencies, and the rest of the donors in that perspective. So what we are looking for is to a real partnership between the National Statistical Offices and the UN agencies and donors. And what I'm saying in that perspective, that the support should be based on the national priorities and should be driven according to the national priorities and based on the existing plan and capacity assessment. What we are also facing, some duplication between the donors. That's part of the challenges that we're facing. There's no accumulation, there's no harmonization, and what we are looking for is more on the base of real partnership. And also what we lack until today is a real technical and financial support in that perspective. So what I'm saying, we do have some good examples. I'm not just, but at least what the real challenges that we have is really what I'm really stating. I may just give an example on the Arab region. I can tell you that since the endorsement, I want to maybe just talk about 2016. I may say that we had events, forums, conventions, what you may call it, in the region, more than maybe 20, 26. We were repeating each other, and each donor was actually organizing his own or forum in the region, same speakers, same agenda, same everything. So what I'm really, that really we care of, that why we started just to waste our time, efforts, and even money. So, and this is the best way, what I'm saying, how we can have a real partnership, how we can divide our role, how we can harmonize and avoid such kind of duplications. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you put forward a couple of very important points, which we probably can come back also in the discussion. So we will have some time also for your questions and comments, so if you wouldn't already think about them. But I think it's now a very good moment to bring Oliver Shinganya also in, involve him also in the discussion. He's the director of the African Center for Statistics from the UNECA. Oliver, you have a very long experience and you work personally for a very long time with national statistical offices, and now you just moved to UNECA and you have sort of the role and obligation as a UN agency, and Ola has mentioned it, in terms of now providing support to national statistical offices in Africa. So how do you relate so far to the discussion, what you have heard? How do you think about adapting capacity development support from your organization? If you could kindly share your thoughts with us.
Thank you, Johannes. Thank you, Minus, also. And thank you, Johannes and Minus, for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm going to address a couple of issues here relating to what has been said already this afternoon. I think among some of the said traditional challenges of national statistical offices in delivering capacity development is political will at government level. Oftentimes, the traditional challenges, we sort of tend to associate them with development partners either as failure for delivering or providing the support. But we forget the most important ingredient, which is the political will for governments to invest in statistics, which is basically what Ola is actually saying here, is that how much investment does, or commitment does government have towards what they normally, through the paper make commitment and actually apply to what they have actually committed to. Oftentimes what we have seen is that governments have committed to SDGs and all sorts of strategies throughout the continent, maybe not just in Africa, but maybe other regions as well. But when it comes to application, when it comes to actually putting investment, putting a finger on what needs to be done, that doesn't happen. So I think that if we are to deliver on on the SDGs, first of all, we need to create this awareness, sensitization amongst the political entities in governments to actually begin to think of how much are they committing to these processes. That's the one part. The other part that I see as a big issue that we're facing is the issue of leadership and management of the national statistical offices. And this, to some extent, is also associated with the legal framework under which most of these national statistical offices operate. They are so limiting in the sense that in many times you have a head of statistical office that goes to the helm of the office without any training of whatsoever in leadership and management. And I think if we have to create this capacity development, there is also a need to have capacity development to get to the position of being a director or assistant general or whatever it is, to be able to manage the resources, to be able to manage the human resources, and also these issues of mobilizing resources and how do we go to development partners. The other issue that I see really as very critical is what I call undefined or unclear funding horizon. You have a capacity building program that is agreed in a country, and you have donors that come to and agree that they're going to fund a particular activity, or even the government, and they don't actually realize that capacity development is a process. If we go by definition, is interrelated activities that are to be undertaken over a period of time. But we have a situation where the funding is earmarked, the funding is restricted to a certain window, and without actually looking at it, but what will happen after 5 years, or indeed after within the 2 years that the funding has been earmarked on. So you see a situation where after 2 years, the funding just dries, and the whole program just drops. And then we jump onto another activity, and we're calling that capacity development. So I think there's need to rethink this capacity development. What do we really mean? Can we define it from the beginning? What kind of funding arrangement do we need to put in place so that it's very clear that if we are talking about a program that's going to run for the next 5 years, do we have the funding to deal with all the activities? Are we able to accommodate the changes? Obviously, for any project, there may be changes that need to take place over the period. How do we accommodate that over a period of time? So all those things have to be taken care of from the beginning. So it is an issue that I think needs to be looked at in terms of very clear funding horizon, across the board. The other aspect, of course, we've talked about is the legal framework, which is very restricting. Now, oftentimes, again, we limit this to the national statistical offices, but we forget that there are other data-generating agencies that also operate within different frameworks, legal frameworks. How do we harmonize these frameworks? And that is also very limiting. So again, as we think about capacity building, really is that how do we bring everyone in the data community to be able to harmonize the legal frameworks, to be able to speak to one agenda, ensuring that whatever they need to do within their communities is also taken care of. But again, we're looking at at the bigger picture, which is coming up with the data that is required. So to me, I see that capacity development is something that needs to be defined from onset. And agreeing exactly what needs to be done, and ensuring that it's aligned, first of all, to the national priorities, because oftentimes what we also see that sometimes we tend to just drop some of these activities on the on the country without having to look at what is it that the country actually needs. Yeah, and do they have a strategy that we can use that as an entry point to provide support? And that at times, because we have, development partners may have their own other issues that they need to deal with, there's a tendency to forget that there is need to align some of these activities to the national priorities. So those are some of the things that I really consider as critical in developing capacity in the regions. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. So we are coming now to the end of presentations, and we want to open the floor for questions and comments of the audience. So please, I would ask you to, do you have a microphone? I would ask you to say your name before and your question, and please be concise due to the lack of time. So please.
My name is Anneli Barkema. I'm from a company called TA1.02 Resilience Enterprises. In terms of capacity building, my question is this: are we always looking at funding, or are we also looking at what is already out there in terms of data custodians and just possibly set the standards so that we are able, at the time that we need any kind of data that they might be the custodian of, and have formalized information sharing agreements? And then also with that comes the agility then for us to be able to maximize the data that is already available. So the question is always a case of just funding, or are we also looking at how to help the data custodians out there to formalize information sharing agreements, especially with POPI and all of that?
Thank you so much. What I would suggest is that we have the four speakers note them, and then we will give them a chance later on to answer the question. So we take a few more. The gentleman here was right up. If you can move the mic, and then Daniel.
Thank you very much. Hello? Yes, now it's working. So thank you very much also for the nice presentations and discussion. I especially liked the presentation and discussion from people that are producing statistics. And now to become a little bit more, I would say, concrete. One thing that I have experienced and I have seen in the past is that we often forget as donors that the statistical officers, they have already problems to produce the information that are requested at the moment. We are discussing the SDGs. We are thinking, oh, now finally they will have something to do. It's not true. They're already spending days and nights in producing statistical information that we, international organizations, governments, civil societies, are requesting from them. And it's not easy to take someone away from the regular production and ask this person, please think about the transformation in terms of resources, but also in terms of routine. So one thing that we have discovered is that if we want a National Statistical Office or whatever other institution producing statistics to think about how to transform, how to become more operational and to streamline the statistical production, it's good to take a few people out from the daily production and put these people working on the transformation. Can be within the small team you have on quality, planning, etc. That this small team very close to the Director General, that does not have to go through the filters of the hierarchy, can discuss and make proposals directly to the Director General. The other thing also is that because it's not easy, we say that routine is it's hard to die or something like that. The champions in terms of modernization are not always the people that are in the hierarchy. It's also very important to find the champions in your organization, and this is by experience, that can bring this message further and try also to convince other people that it's good to change and not to remain in the routine. So this is something that I wanted to bring. I think it goes a little bit in your direction, but please remember that these people are already producing statistics at the moment, and we ask them to do even more. The other point I wanted also to mention is the coordination, and we mentioned many times.
Sorry, because
yes.
we have so many other people wanted to interview. But could you just maybe state your name and organization, because we didn't hear that.
Gabriel Games, UNSD.
Fantastic. And then there's Daniel Bick, the gentleman. Thank you so much. Excellent question.
Yes, my question I'm Daniel Bick. I'm representing Statec, the Luxembourg Statistical Office. I'm not the only one here to do that, but my question relates to the two previous ones. I mean, if we want to make a better use or more use of the existing data, which will allow to improve the availability of some of the indicators to be produced for the SDGs, isn't it the time to rethink something which is our monster of Loch Ness, being statistician, which is the statistical confidentiality when the question is about individual data? So if we want to achieve, to create the condition to increase the capacity or to build new capacities, we need to create the condition for a better use of existing data, to build new protection for unfair use of individual data, but to extend the usage of individual data already collected or to be collected. Thank you.
Please. Shaida here? Oh.
Hello.
Okay.
Yeah,
Let's get
okay.
next.
Yo, Shaida is first.
It's okay. You start, and then if you want to, and then Shaida. Okay, it's okay.
I will transfer to Shaida. We are talking about the capacity building.
Just your name, please. Sorry.
My name is Shyam Upadhyay. I'm from UNIDO. We are talking about the capacity building in the national statistical offices. And SDG has posed a big challenge, not only to the national statistical offices, but also international organizations who are acting as a custodian agency. National statistical offices might be interested if those agencies which are responsible, how much capacity they have, how much they can actually help to the country. Maybe they themselves lack the capacity. Because these are the new challenges, new type of indicators, new situation. So I would ask the panelists if what they think about that, because it should be in the both way, not only in the national but also in the international side. Thank you.
Thank you. Now Shaida, and then we start with the panelists.
Thank you, Shaida Badi from Open Data Watch. I wanted to go back to the beginning, the presentation by Johannes, where he sort of put a hypothesis on the table of whether we do need a game change in the capacity development. Do we need a capacity development 4.0, for example? And because we need to, focus much more on users, on, new sources of data, to capacity for donors, and so I want to push the panelists a little bit more, because when you went back to your presentations, it sounded a bit from time to time that it was same old, same old. So I wanted to see whether you can sort of draw out some of these really contemporary approaches that you're taking. Maybe one example, or two examples that we get from you. What would be one of those new contemporary features in the capacity development 4.0 that you think we should all hear from, and all the people who are right now listening to you online? Thank you.
So, okay, now we're going to give 2 minutes to each panel. Do you start, Oliver, please?
Thank you. Let me deal with three questions. I think the first one was the first presenter, and then the one by Gabriel, and the last one by Shaida. I think really when we're talking about capacity building, we should link both provision of data provision as well as the funding. Because you cannot do any capacity building if there is no funding. But at the same time, we need to recognize the existing infrastructure within the National Statistical Office or even within the region that they can provide, which does not necessarily need any funding. Because more oftentimes, I think one mistake that we make is that we want to associate every activity with funding, and some of it doesn't really need that. All it requires is goodwill and taking advantage of what is existing. And in addition to that, taking advantage of South-South cooperation. And I'll give you an example. When I used to work for the institution that I used to before I came to ECA, is that we wrote on what we called peer review, and we used national statistical experts to go to another country to actually review and discuss with their fellow experts in that country to provide technical assistance. And oftentimes what you get out of there is that there's a lot of information that comes out of that relationship because they know each other, they already know their weaknesses, and they're free to discuss about some of these things that come out of that process. So somehow we need to take advantage of this peer review or South-South cooperation and making sure that the experts themselves begin talk to each other. But of course, complemented with the additional expert which comes from the technical advisor. So I think for me these two things must come together. I do agree with that, with Gabriel about transformation. We all need to recognize that national statistical offices are already doing quite a lot. But I think what SDG's initiative and all data revolution, the big data has done, is to awaken what is already existing in the spirit of the national experts in the countries to say, look, there's now a new impetus and we need to meet and deliver on Agenda 2030. And I think, therefore, it should not be looked as additional work, but something that enhances what is already there without having to, to say, look, now we have got additional burden, because it is restructuring the work that is already there to be able to speed up in providing support. I think on the last point, again on capacity development, the way I look at it is first of all, a new rethinking based on what Ola said here is a modernization of the national statistical offices. And I think again, oftentimes we want to associate that only with technology, IT, mobile phones and things like that. But it's more than that. It's rethinking, completely re-engineering of the whole National Statistical Office. So you need to go out of the office, have a retreat. How do you want to move and change things? And the new approach, change the traditional thinking. I think that way, then we can contribute to proper capacity development. Thank you.
Ola, please.
Thank you. And I want to just actually continue, which I fully agree with what Oliver has mentioned. Yes, that's really very true. When we talk about modernization, it's actually modernization of developing working methodologies and developing the existing tools. And I fully agree about what Gabriella has mentioned about the transformation, and that's why I mentioned inside the National Statistical Office that we did some restructuring within actually the structure of the institutions, and we developed actually a unit that work on the Sustainable Development Goals, and which has some members from different departments, from the economy, environment, methodology, and all these aspects to focus more on the transformation agenda. So this is what I meant by restructuring. Modernization, when I talked about modernization, we have so many tools within the data collection, data processing, dissemination, and all these aspects. I may just mention, for example, we have already developed the generic statistical business process model. We have developed our metadata in that perspective. We took advantage that this year, 2017, we are implementing our population, housing, and establishment census. So we were able to review our questionnaire and including some indicators within the census. So we were able to get use of the available resources that we have. And this is what we were talking about. Just one thing about the capacity building of the National Statistical Office. from UNIDO, you were talking about, we didn't talk only about the capacity building of the National Statistical Office. We talked about the capacity building of all the partners and stakeholders within the National Statistical System, and not only the National Statistical Office. But I actually disagree with you on talking about the capacity of the international donors, because the Sustainable Development Goals are actually, where is targeted for the countries, and to be defined, their priorities by the countries, and implemented by the countries, and monitored by the national statistical offices. So what I mean, this all structure that we are talking about is a challenge enough for us to move ahead. So if there's a role within this perspective for any donor, this can be part of it. But if it's really not part of it, so I think there's. I don't think there's a space for them also to be taken part within the capacity building. The draw of temporary examples, I can talk about what are actually our main priorities. The development of administrative data. This is one of the major need for capacity development. Increasing the capacity and enhancing the quality of data. I may say just one example that we worked together with Paris 21 on the mapping. Paris 21 did a model of matrix for the indicators. We were able to train on it, and we, as a statistical office, we also were able to train also our members in the Arab region. So this is part of the examples that which we have actually developed our capacity building, and we exchange it with our sisters organizations. Thank you.
So Emmanuel, please, 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. Maybe about two things. Johannes asked a question before, and Ola was able to answer some of them. But let me add a couple of points to that, since he asked a question about the about the donors. Number one thing is that they need to be able to focus on the priorities that has been defined by the clients, whether it's the countries or the organizations, rather than their own defined priorities. Number two is that there are still the issues of conditionalities. It's not necessarily for most of the bilateral countries, but the multilateral institutions, a lot of them still have overwhelming conditionalities that make it almost impossible for things to move forward. Number three is better coordination, which has been mentioned before, so that there's no wasteful duplication of efforts. And to me, the most important is what I call institutional support. ACBF has created over 50-something think tanks in the continent, and everybody finds them useful to come and support. But they will say they will only do program support. They will only help them to do one research agenda or the other. They forget that somebody had to provide institutional support for many years for these institutions to stand, or for those training programs to work. So if you're only coming to fund programs and not supporting the institutions, especially new ones, how are they going to have the people who are going to man them, the office spaces, the computers, and the researchers who are going to work for them? So we need to rethink this. That's one thing that has to be rethought as well, and having multi-year programs. Then the second point I want to address is the issue of the new things, new thinkings, and new ideas. There's a saying in the innovation circles that innovation does not always have to occur at the technological frontier. It's not necessarily that something is so technologically new that it becomes an innovation. We could just be a different kind of partnership. It could just be a different approach to doing things. But in many cases, it is actually doing what is fundamental, rather than just in terms of thinking about new things. But I can give you an example of some things that have been happening. The Gates Foundation found out that their projects they were supporting in Africa were not performing at the level that they want them to perform in terms of delivering services to women, for health, for agriculture, and for the other areas they're working in. And they asked ACBF to assist. What did we do? We developed a capacity development program, which involves, first of all, doing a capacity needs assessment. So if it is the NSOs you're talking about, the first point would be a capacity needs assessment. And number two, then you work with them to develop a capacity building strategy or plan, and then you implement it. It could be leadership that is their problem. It could be monitoring and evaluation. It could be human resources. It could be anything. But you see, the thing that is new here is moving from best practice to what we call best fit or what we call good fit. In other words, you cannot use just one size doesn't fit all. It has to be tailored. But using that kind of approach, and we have gotten significant improvements. We're working with the ADB to do the same thing to enhance their implementation of their programs. I think that's the other things that has been answered. But yes, you do need money, but not only money in terms of building capacity. I agree there are other things that are needed as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. Michael?
Well, there was no question directly or directed to a donor perspective or so, but I think I have also, of course, quite some takeaways from this session. Thank you very much also for my co-panelists that came up with a lot of trends and issues that are important also from a donor perspective in rethinking capacity development. I think many aspects really concern capacity development in the very general sense. What was said regarding predictability of funding, the long-term perspective that we have to take, political will, leadership was mentioned. I think also important aspects in addition to funding gaps that we always raise. All these issues are very important, and I think also donors have to rethink. It's not just the recipient countries and also donor agencies. We are not really used to work with such a goal framework. I think sometimes the statistics community is further advanced, a lot further advanced than the policy makers in this area of development cooperation and international cooperation in general. So we are not used with such a broad, to work with such a broad goal framework with integrated targets and already with the MDGs, we had some struggles, but it wasn't really a donor issue. It was the recipients' issues or the multilateral agencies and the implementers' issues. And that's, I think, therefore, donors have to rethink too. And Switzerland, for example, really wants to support its partner countries in development cooperation on implementing the SDGs, starting from strategic support in order to establish the strategies that are needed to implement the SDGs. And it can go all the way down to direct support to national strategic offices. And there, I think we really have to take a needs-based approach, as was also mentioned just by Emmanuel again. The priorities they set and not donors bringing the funds. It has to be an inclusive process. The coordination is extremely important. We've heard from all the challenges we have there. And these are all new features to donors as well. So I think donors have still quite a learning curve ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. I just look, we have a clock here running. It looks like a bomb clock. 1 minute, 19 seconds we have still, so we are doing good in time. But unfortunately, I think we have to wrap up this session. It was very exciting for us, obviously, to hear these different perspectives. The good news is that this is not the end, it's not the beginning of the end, it's the end of the beginning of this track, so it's just the kickoff. The 3 points that I take away from this first session is, let us remind where we started. We started with the question, is a new approach needed? And I think there might be discussion if it needs to be disruptive or it could be a gradual change, but I think all the speakers here and also the intervention from the audience seems to suggest there's a good point to be made for a fundamental change or for a change in how we think about capacity. Secondly, capacity change not only in our own statistical community for the data producers, but we also need to develop capacity and think about capacity development for data users. I think also the question of Danielle was leading into this direction. And last but not least, and Michael was also so kind to accept that as a sort of, if I may say, the representative of a donor, also capacity development for donors. Now we have a little bit of self-promotion for a working paper from Paris 21, which will come out shortly, which is written not by staff of Paris 21, but by a German development institute who has done a lot of work on capacity development. And it's called Realizing the Data Revolution for Sustainable Development Towards Capacity Development 4.0 question mark. So this will come out shortly, because I think we can benefit a lot from development literature at large. There's a lot of literature about capacity development. There's a lot of literature, as the professor mentioned, that is very well known. And my sense is that sometimes we in the data and statistical community are not really aware of all these things that have already been researched for a very long time. And also the link, as you were suggesting, to the 8 effectiveness agenda and to the monitoring evaluation could be made stronger from both ends, from the 8 effectiveness agenda, the Paris Declaration, and so forth, and also from our side. So I think the last point, there were a few elements in terms of what could be the new elements of a new approach. I think we heard a few interesting ideas, but we need to drive deeper. We need to dig a little bit deeper, and I'm glad we have still 2 days for doing so. So from my perspective, this was a very good start, and let me now hand over for final words to Anand.
Well, thank you. We are just 1 minute late, so it's not that bad. Thank you very, very much, you, for joining this panel. All of you for being here. I hope you enjoy the World Data Forum, particularly the sessions of this track, this capacity development tracks. And again, as I started, I hope you enjoyed the city of Cape Town, the Table Mountain, and the lovely penguins. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was really good.